resources, that's a major factor. Next up, I don't believe something like this would cause anybody to stop reproducing. Maybe there are some conscientious people out there, but it's probably not going to stop many people. So if this was to be distributed to everybody, almost everybody, there would be a lot of people really quickly, and that might be pretty awful. So if you do monetize it, free market just says that in very short.
No, I mean, what I hear you saying is you're making a consequentialist argument, an outcomes-based argument, that left unfettered, if we just say yes, it's predictable that lots of people will take it. The harm, the foreseeable harm, will be total and utter overpopulation that we won't be able to manage. And you're saying it's foreseeable that that's going to lead to catastrophe, enough to warrant, maybe saying we can't just offer this to anybody who wants it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that's the perfect example. You're persuaded that the outcome will be untenable. I mean, the counter argument would be that, well, maybe there'll be a whole bunch of other technological innovations, whereas now we think we could probably only feed 10 billion people. There's no way we could feed 20 billion people. Which I think is true and probably valid, but maybe we will simultaneously invent something that enables us to triple food production, and that we really could have 50 billion people on the earth. I mean, I am convinced that we probably are overpopulated at 7 billion, but when I look around the world, both out of the car window and through Google Maps, I see mostly empty space. All right, thanks. We have to give the whole committee a chance to chime in.
I just want to tackle your point where it was like, if you have a longer lifespan, you might be like less productive or something like that.
That's one of my concerns,
Yeah.
that without the fear of death, I'm not sure that the motivations we take for granted would be there. I mean, if you're a procrastinator and you think that almost always tomorrow is a better time to do it than today, is that you're just gonna sit on your hands your entire life because next year is always better than this year to do stuff?
I just did a Google search and I looked at 1600, 1700 average lifespans, and it was 30 to 40, but now we're at 80. And I think our productivity, I don't know how they measure productivity, but I think society as a whole is better than when we lived 30 or 40. But I don't know if there's a limit in our lifespan where then we start losing productivity because
Well,
so I think Dublin's okay.
yeah, I mean, one of the questions that is probably going through some of your heads is, what's the quality of this extra life? Is it the extra life of a young, vital person, or is it the extra life of a geriatric patient on their deathbed? And so it's the former, that you're able to reverse aging, and your long life is that of a middle-aged person, not a typical 90-year-old. Yeah.
Kind of in reference to what both of you were saying, my gut reaction to that was no, just because the first thing that came to my head was, as humans, I don't think we're as interested in the idea of living longer as much as living better, because you can, let's say people live up to 200 now. That doesn't really guarantee that they're going to live a better life. And I don't think that is something that people take into account as much when they think about immortality, because saying here we're talking about the natural process of aging, right? But that doesn't mean you can't be killed. So
some people,
you can live longer, but that doesn't mean that you're going to live a better life. And I think that we want to pursue a better life. And, if we can eliminate a lot of those diseases or something, so everybody can live, 80 years, but in those 80 years, live a life that they can end and say, okay, yeah, I did good here, I lived a healthy life, I'm fulfilled with it. then that's better than living hundreds of years of just, at some point, nothingness.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, I appreciate the point, but it's, you know, I don't think we're necessarily saying it's one or the other. I mean, you're sort of setting it up. If you had the choice between, you know, making the quality way better, you know, or simply making the quantity double, you know, without it being any better. I mean, in some ways, that would be a different discussion if we had to choose one or the other. You know, so I'm assuming that the vast majority of people are just living a normal life. You know, people who say, well, it could be a better quality, but it's not awful. And that they've got the decision we have to make is about longevity. We would hope, as we always do, that we can make the quality of living better and more meaningful and give people more pleasure. But in a way, that's a different set of questions beyond the purview of this committee, which just has to decide on this pill.
But Manal, would you say, let's assume that it does just increase like your prime age lifespan. Would you support it then? Because I know in the past we couldn't even see our grandparents. It wasn't in our culture. But now it's in our culture to say, oh, let's go visit grandma. So I think if we put this pill in after like, I don't know how long, it would change our culture entirely, and we would just be like, oh, let's see our great grandma next Wednesday or something. So like right now it's hard, but I think as we adjust to it, we would make it so it would be more productive, right? Because then everyone would want to do more, and then you'd be like, oh, he did this, so, right?
Well, again, but all of these things raise questions as to, you know, what is the key, you know, to human existence being successful? Do you have to do stuff? I mean, sometimes a lot of us like not doing stuff. We like to sort of be, you know, which is why a lot of it does point to these fundamental questions. What, you know, do you have to do something? Do you have to be productive in the world? Isn't it okay to merely exist? You know, if you're sitting amongst a web of people who love each other, you know, is that a good enough role? I mean, I think most of us probably recognize that it isn't essential to have a certain level of productivity. You know, I'd say in the enlightened future, we would recognize that all human beings are able to produce or to contribute to some good, whether even if it's just by being in a web of a loving relationship. You know, I think we're probably pretty much past the point where we think you need to be productive in order to make life worthwhile.
And then on like your point, like you're saying that like what if like in the future like AI takes over like our jobs and stuff, then we won't have the need to be productive, right? Because like right now, if you're just thinking like if right now our life expectancy is to increase, then we're like, oh, we can like do more research, or we can like earn more money or something, and like those are like motivating factors. But like if in the future we don't have to do those things anymore, then there's like not really anything to do other than like visit people, and like that might also increase like risky behavior too that we like talked about before when we're talking about AI replacing our jobs. Like we'll have so much free time that people won't know what to do with it anymore. So that might increase like maybe like crimes or something, and then that could lead to like poor quality of life that like people might not want.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, in some ways, you know, I think you've given a reasonable list of things we might be worried about. You know, it's really hard to say if, in fact, things would go that direction. I mean, there's the possibility. You know, but the question is, does that, you know, does fear of not quite knowing how we're going to fill our time, is that reason enough to not do it? You know, again, I'm not sure that question is really different between an 80-year lifespan and a 200-year lifespan. That it's still, you know, you got to figure out what do we do all day, what should we do all day, and how does that impact the question?
Yeah, kind of just like building off of Simon's point, like I understand the argument of how some people some people might not be as productive. They might just be here for a good time instead of a long time. But I'm sure there are people who would make use of every single day that they're living. Like, if we can just conceptualize whether or not we could have people like Einstein or Newton still living in this world, and if we can kind of look at the cost-benefit ratio of what their contributions would be if they were still living for such a long time, and if they were exposed to the modern revelations of research that we have today. Like, if we had their mind at our disposal right now, what would the implications for the future be, and how could that further benefit humanity?
I mean, just my gut response to that is that I'm not sure that Einstein, he made some incredible proposals in the early 1900s. I'm not sure that he would be any farther ahead. I mean, it's incredible what he did, but it actually raised more questions than it answered, right? I mean, it's possible, but same thing with Newton. I think that there's a good chance that they had some special mind that none of us have, but I think that, if you look around universities, there's hundreds and hundreds of really smart people, probably taking things in good directions, so, I'm not sure it would make a difference. But, any more thoughts about what we should do?
Honestly, looking at the other ethical principles like beneficence and non-maleficence, I don't see there being too much of a problem. But I think that question comes down to how much you quantify the increase in lifespan. Like, if we were to double the lifespan or maybe just add like another 50 years, I don't think it would make as much of a difference if we were to go off what's been seen in the past. Like, again, in the 16th century, lifespans were around 35 to 40 years old. We've doubled since then, and it appears that we've done pretty well so far. I don't know if we're going to reach a plateau or not, but I think it might be a good idea to perhaps regulate this hypothetical injection in small doses. So maybe not give people the opportunity to increase their life tenfold from the get-go.
So I hear you exploring the middle path. You're looking for compromise. Again, I think when you're talking about ethical method, presented with this or that, much of the time, the best answer is going to be finding the middle ground. So I think what you're doing is exactly is appropriate. I won't tell you what my vote is till the end, but foreshadowing is that it might be a form of compromise.
So after hearing everybody's kind of take on this, I just think that all of this would be based on like people's ideals. So like the best way to go would be, it's not really one way, I don't think. Because like say, if somebody prioritizes intelligence, obviously living longer will give you that opportunity to increase, to learn more and to, go places and talk to different people. So that would definitely increase your intelligence and things like that. Or like, like the hedonistic way that you were talking about, living a longer life would allow you to carry out all the pleasures that you would want to, indulge and things like that. So I think it's just based on ideals. I don't know, me personally, what's virtuous or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear you processing it and saying what you think the issues might be. You're sort of struggling with, would it be better or not? It really depends on what people value. Do they value the right things? Do they value the wrong things? Recognizing that, do we have any chance to figure out what might be better? So, good, helpful thoughts, but, on the committee, we're gonna need to have your vote fairly soon.
My first gut reaction to this question would be no, because there's so much unknowns. But I think going through, I think the idea is, if you kind of look at it in a bit of an abstract sense, is that if you're assuming, in the future, everybody will have access to this technology and everybody will live 10 times longer, you kind of, you think it's kind of great that, well, the idea is that it would be great that you have all these people who live really long, but on the flip side, it doesn't eliminate things such as diseases such as cancer, which may still be present. Now, of course, if you're talking about the society in the future, that might also go away. The other thing, however, is you could think about mental illnesses such as, like as you grow older, that's the kind of ravages of time. You might develop schizophrenia down the road, perhaps, and what if you get past the point of you can live, but you're mentally still not there, and it is against human rights to take the life of someone else without their consent. So would you perhaps eventually have a future where you have a population of those who are mentally incapable of really doing anything?
Yeah. No, so I mean, I hear you also implying mainly a consequentialist, an outcomes-based argument.
Yes, but I think a bit further than that is you could also assume that in the future they'll somehow work out all the neurological kinks in the brain, and that won't be an issue anymore. So if I guess if you have a perfectly utopian or society where you won't have any more diseases, that won't be an issue. You can think about, I guess, yeah. So if there's no more, like I said, mental illnesses to worry about, then one second.
Here, let me just
Yeah.
rephrase it while you're thinking. I mean, what I hear you're experimenting with possible problems. Okay, one of which is this extra life just going to mean I'm gonna get hit with diseases that, typical diseases of old age. So for ease, let's just say that along with this pill that manipulates the gene that enables you to age, we are simultaneously on top of all
Yeah.
of human diseases, physical illness,
Yeah.
most mental illness.
Yeah.
But we haven't conquered or eliminated the reality of jealousy and heartbreak. Those things still exist.
Right.
No,
Sorry, I still, so I was thinking, if the scenario is that you are, along with this pill, it's like a miracle pill, makes you just live longer and you'll be perfectly healthy, then I think that if you look at the principles, if you look at the principle of respect for autonomy, I'm sure a lot of people want something like this, definitely. Beneficence, well, you're gonna get a miraculous body. Justice might be a hard one to kind of play around, but once again, kind of in the future, if everybody has access to this, then, you would be equally have that healthy body. But at the same time, if you do not take the injections, then will you also be stigmatized for that? So,
yeah.
however, what I did like was when listening to Apir's suggestion of giving not a 10 times longer lifespan right away, but maybe 2 or 3 times a bit. I think that can help if you want to kind of tackle the problem slowly, because right now I would think that culturally human beings are not able to fathom having such a long lifespan, how it will affect your dynamic with your family and others as well.
Yeah, I mean, I become aware of the difference between some of your ages and mine when you say things like that, because for me in my early 50s, I've noticed that things haven't changed that much in the last 10 or 20 years. I mean, you sort of become an adult, you got a family, and then you start doing things. If you're happy doing it, it is already year after year after year.
Just one more quick point. So, looping back to what I said earlier, assuming that our society has already developed to a certain point where we have reached a utopia, and there wouldn't be that many problems other than the usual crime and such. Already, people are usually completely deterministic when dealing with their own time. People choose to waste their time or they choose to do things. So giving people a better choice to use their time, rather have more time to do things they want, that wouldn't be that much of a logistical problem with it.
Yeah, well, I think that the logistics caused by too many people.
Oh yeah, that's, well, assuming this would be utopia, that probably won't be an issue, but that is unfortunately.
I mean, one of the things about utopia, you know, sort of the image of the perfected world, that you're never there. It's always in the future. I mean, you never actually arrive. It's all, but hopefully, in a healthy society, you are working towards some concept of it. So, I mean, in a sense, we're talking about what we think is the increasing real question of what might the utopian society look like in the world that we now understand is likely to have really advanced technology, including the possibility of superintelligence. You know, and again, it's the presence of these things that require society to create committees like ours to figure out how to proceed. You know, because we do actually need to make a decision in the real world about what we're going to do. So we've got a little bit more time for the committee. You know, I sense that we might be moving towards some type of consensus. I've heard a couple of proposals that have to do with compromise and middle ground. But let's hear from some other people.
I kind of had an idea based on what would happen if we were to implement the injections today. So I was kind of thinking along the lines of a palliative care test for patients, where you're focused on improving your patient's quality of life rather than the quantity of life, just because treatments may be more harmful if you're just extending the quality or the quantity. But I feel that if said injections were a possibility, why not improve both the quality and the quantity of life for patients? So kind of for that if it's to be implemented.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some ways I might be implying that the other new technologies have a good chance of making life a little bit better than it is today. So I'd say at least we're dealing with good quality of life and the prospect of increasing quality. So it's you know, I mean, I agree that that in palliative care there's often that that very real decision. At what point do we prioritize quality over mere quantity? You know, and in some sense, I think all of us would argue we want good life, not just long life. But like I said, I think in this not yet utopia, but much better world, where you don't have to choose. You can both. You can have a good or better life, and it could be longer. I mean, it is one of the questions: is are the negative effects going to build up? We're going to have too many people. We're going to have people dying and having conflicts, and therefore the quality of everybody's life because of that is going to go down, which might be a reason to say let's hold off on this, at least for now.
So there's something where we're kind of dancing around as if we kind of already know the answer, and that is the unique creative individual that makes a huge breakthrough. Do we believe that just having more people active and healthy for a longer period is going to create a lot more positive breakthroughs because of more unique individuals like Richard Feynman and Albert Einstein and Newton and so on? Or do we really believe that they weren't so unique, that actually eventually other people would have found the same things and so on? So there would be kind of a quantitative formula that if indeed the incidence of this unique breakthrough kind of person is at a certain level that allowing a lot more people on Earth and to live for longer will just give us a lot more positive breakthroughs. But we don't really know that, as opposed to the idea that, you know, what Einstein found, somebody else would have found, and, you know, there's nothing, we make up stories about these people, but actually there are a bunch of other people who could have done the same thing. So we don't know the difference between those, but if we did, there might be a strong argument one way or the other, you know, that for instance, having more individuals on Earth at a time is a guaranteed benefit to us, or it is absolutely not. That there's no reason to think that having more minds active at a time is going to lead to more positive breakthroughs and, you know, betterment of the human race.
No, but even calling into question, you know, brings us back, you know, well, what is the point? Breakthroughs are great in that they enable us to understand the world better or build better things.
Right.
But whatever the breakthrough, there's still the ongoing interminable question, you know, and what then?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and you know,
Yeah.
so even when we've got, let's say, the incredibly smart robots with highly intelligent brains that it turns out are totally benevolent and help us in every way.
Right.
You know, you can imagine then, as some in the course have described, the future of abundance. You know, that this, you know, in some ways you could describe the history of civilization, the last 5,000 years, where we went from small hunter-gatherer groups to collectives because of agriculture and living in the same place, that we you know, have made these great breakthroughs. I was in a conversation with a friend the other day of how thankful I am to be alive now and not 500 years ago, because I just can't see myself, when pining for a delicious helping of protein, having to go out and hunt for that. You know, I mean, the supermarket is great, but somebody else can do the hunting. You know, so in a lot of ways, every technological breakthrough, civilizational breakthrough, in a way creates more leisure time. You know, my old grandmother, when she was a little kid and the family was having chicken, you know, go out in the back and pluck the chicken and, you know, and do the whole thing. So, so life until prior to this century was filled with a lot more necessity. You know, just getting through the day, you know, doing the laundry, you know, meant it was easier to fill your day with the bare necessities of, you know, feeding and clothing and taking care of your family. So in some ways, the last century, with the incredible breakthroughs, creates more and more leisure time. You know, and when we project, I think, reasonably into the future that the artificial, you know, with machines or otherwise, really will be able to do a bunch of the labor that's going to give us even more leisure time, which then creates, I think, that ethical question: what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to fill that time? You know, and what is inevitable and what isn't? I mean, sometimes I worry. You know, you hear on some shows about the universe, people question, why is it that we human beings, we've been looking so closely for decades now at an intelligent life elsewhere in the universe? You know, we've got technology that if they were out there, good chance we'd be able to detect something, you know, some non-random you know, echo that gives us a sense, and why haven't we? You know, which leads people to the theory, well, maybe it's the fate of all biological beings that end up developing big brains and getting smart, that they develop powerful technologies that inevitably end up wiping them out. And that's why we don't see them. You know, and then when, you know, I think Einstein and Newton, great, you know, taught us so much about how the world actually works. Also, you could argue Einstein was one of the key, contributors to understanding the atom and the atomic forces, and enabling the super technologies that can destroy us. I mean, that's part of the radical challenge of this age, is that we couldn't have been discussing this 200 years ago. We had no means to destroy ourselves. We had no means, even in the worst pandemic, to spread that around the world. In which case I can see eventually making an argument that, if history had taken some different turns, not developed the technology, in the long run it would have been better, because sort of primitive beings have a chance of living for millennia, and sophisticated technological beings that remain humans subjected to whims, jealousies, end up destroying each other with their power.
I just wanted to say one last thought before we vote. But I was thinking that it would be a good idea. I think in the past, when I've looked at this question in this class, I've also said that I would be in favor of it. But I was just thinking that if this technology did exist, we already know that it would not be rolled out or offered to everyone at the same time. Like, obviously the West would get it first, not even just everyone in the Western world, but the Western elite. So I think it would also be scary to think about how our cultures, our politics would change if the powerful people in society began getting this. If the presidential term, instead of 4 years, if it was 10 years, it would make huge differences. And I think it's really relevant in politics, I think, because a lot of what my generation is talking about right now, policy-wise, is that a lot of the decision makers are really out of tune with what the youth want, which is why a lot of things are going not the way we would want it. But if those people now can double their lifespan and they stay in power for that much longer, then I think it would make life pretty difficult for the people who weren't on the front line of receiving that.
Yeah. So again, I hear very much an outcomes-based argument that you think, based on the way the current world works, it's inevitably, if we go ahead and say yes, it's going to fall upon the very wealthy that can afford it. It's going to create this really strange new class of people that live a long time, and then everybody else. And you just can't see how it ends up being a better world. Which again, I think, just to pause that, that's mainly the reasoning, not that we're violating a rule, but that you can predict that this is not going to lead to a good outcome. All right, so before I just ask you for a show of hands about whether you'd like us to say yes or no, does anybody want to amend the proposal? Or modify it?
Well, I think the question, an important question to clarify is, we've been discussing hypotheticals of, years down in the future, but this question is kind of asking now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, whether we're sitting here in 2019 or 2039, we have the good fortune of being on this committee. Society apparently is going to abide by what we decide and either carry on in this work or not. I'm out of power. So I guess the question about is there middle ground? So I mean, I guess I'll just throw it out there. Is there anybody who would like us to entertain the possibility of allowing the first pill and not the second, and saying that for now let's have a double lifespan, collectively decide to see how that goes for a few centuries and revisit the question. Does that sound, is that a compromise that would be acceptable to people? Or is there anybody who wants to say, no, there can't be any of this? Or yes, of course, it should be free, put it on the open market. The genius of the market will figure out where it ought to go.
If it was like vaccines where everyone has the option to take it, then I'd be in favor of that. But if it was like you have to pay for it, then I don't think I'd be in favor.
All right, so as long as it's free, available to all comers? Yeah.
One quick question, in relation to things like patents, would a company already have a patent on this, or?
I don't know, my imagination didn't go to that level of detail. That's probably a fair question, such a thing would be patented. You know, I'm gonna let you guys think about it and decide next week, but, you know, I will throw out there that there are a lot of things to consider in such a case, that, you know, the current state of the world, you know, obviously a division between rich and poor, haves and have-nots that create a sense of injustice. I would hope that this technology could absolutely be shared equally, and it may be that we would have to look at how can we tweak the economic systems of the world to ensure that distribution is in fact fair. While I can get my head around the first one, that we could probably live to 150 and probably make good use of it and still have a sense that the end is coming, although I'm not sure exactly what would happen to the inevitability of death. I mean, if you knew that you could live till 150, but if somehow you could get your hands on one of these pills, you could skirt the system. I mean, you're sort of getting around a fundamental reality that we all must die, which is in a way the shadow that's hanging over us. That I fear that the human condition, without that sense that we must die at some point, would be radically altered, and possibly in a way that we're not happy about. So with extreme caution, I'd say first pill only and not the second one.
Blue?
Anyway,
Yes.
think about it, and we can talk a little bit more when I next meet. I think it's
Okay.
next week or the week after. Anyways, thanks a lot.